Have you ever wondered what it feels like when a familiar world does not vanish in fire or noise, but in whiteness? Not destroyed exactly, only hushed, softened, covered so completely that the roads forget they are roads, the parked cars forget their shapes, and the ordinary life of a neighborhood seems to sink under a silence deeper than night. Tonight we drift back to January of 1978, to one of those winter weeks when the American Midwest and Northeast were pressed beneath snow. Cold and wind so relentless that millions of people felt, for a little while, as if the world had paused. This is a history of a blizzard, yes, but more than that. It is a history of rooms, of windows, of radios, murmuring in the dark, of cups warmed between both hands, of how a house changes when the weather outside becomes too large to ignore, of how a storm can make people notice the small things they usually step past without gratitude. Tonight we are not going to hurry through the facts. We are going to walk slowly. We are going to keep close to warmth whenever the story grows cold. We are going to let the snow remain in the past and nowhere else. And because every quiet history is easier to enter when the body feels safe, let your shoulders unclench just a little. Let the muscles around your eyes soften. Let the room around you settle into the background. Whatever your own day has been, you do not need to carry all of it into the next hour. You may set some of it down here. You may leave it, for now, beside the door, like a wet winter coat. And then come with me to a gray American morning in late January, when the streets were still themselves, the coffee was still brewing, the radios were still casual, and almost nobody yet understood how strange the next few days would become. The morning begins in a bedroom that has held the night as best it can. The heat has run, but winter still leaves a fine edge in the air. The window light is dull and pearly. The sky beyond the curtain is the color of old paper, not dark enough to worry anyone, not bright enough to promise cheer. You lie there for a moment before getting up, listening to the house speak its ordinary morning language. A vent exhales. Somewhere a pipe gives a small metallic complaint. The faintest creak moves through the floorboards. Nothing is wrong. And yet, there is already a difference, the way there sometimes is before weather fully arrives. The room feels as if it is waiting for something your mind has not named yet. When you pull the blanket down, the chill touches your skin with that dry northern bite that belongs to January. Your feet find the floor. Cold rises through your socks. In another season, this would be a small annoyance. In deep winter, it is the first reminder that comfort is always a negotiation between your body and the air around it. You dress a little more carefully than usual shirt, sweater, heavier socks. You pause by the window and part the curtain. Snow is already falling, but only lightly, thin flakes moving at an angle, decorative. Almost the roofs still show their lines. The sidewalk still shows its concrete. The street is wet, not buried. The world can still look entirely manageable just before it begins to change. In the kitchen, coffee starts its slow dark work. The smell alone gives the room a center. That is one of the small luxuries of cold weather, how scent becomes a kind of architecture. Warm coffee, toasted bread, the trace of gas heat, yesterday's newspaper ink, all of it gathers inside the walls and tells you this place is lived in. The radio sits on the counter doing what radios often did in 1978, speaking continuously into a house whether anyone was listening closely or not. Music, a cheerful advertisement. A local voice making mild jokes about the weather. Then the bulletin slips in. A winter storm warning has been issued. Heavy snow is expected. Travel may become difficult later. People should plan ahead. Plan ahead. A useful phrase, though few phrases are more open to interpretation. Across the region, thousands of other kitchens are receiving the same suggestion. Some people hear it and immediately begin adjusting their day. Others hear it and assume the forecasters are being cautious, because forecasters often are. In the northern states, winter is full of warnings that amount to little more than slow commutes and slushy boots. People learn, sometimes unwisely, to normalize the language of weather. You pour your coffee into a mug that warms your fingers at once. Outside, your neighbor is scraping the windshield of his car with quick, practiced strokes. Another person across the street is carrying a paper sack from the garage to the house, shoulders hunched against the wind, though the wind is only beginning to gather itself. A school bus passes. The tires make that wet crunch that belongs to snow before accumulation takes over. Everything looks ordinary enough. That is how many large events begin. Not with a trumpet, not with a cinematic sky, only with the ordinary world, still pretending to be itself. The weather system organizing above the country is not visible from your kitchen window in any complete way. No one looking up from the sidewalk could see the full geometry of it. But far to the north, bitter Arctic air has pushed south with unusual force. From the Gulf, moisture has been climbing northward. Pressure has been falling. Invisible boundaries have been leaning toward one another across enormous distances. What your body notices is heaviness. What your sinuses notice is pressure. What the radio reduces to bulletins is in fact the early shape of a collision. You finish breakfast and leave for work because that is what a weekday asks of you. And because the roads are still open. And because almost everybody continues doing ordinary things right up until ordinary things stop being available. Outdoors the cold has a dry seriousness to it. Snow needles lightly at your coat. The wind is not strong yet, but it is purposeful. It slips around corners and finds the gap at the neck. People move quickly from house to car, car to office, office to store. There is no sense of drama on the sidewalks, only winter business. Your drive is manageable. Traffic lights change as expected. Cars move in their lanes. The city still functions according to all its familiar agreements. In the office, the day begins like any other. Fluorescent hum, typewriters, ringing phones, the smell of paper and old coffee. Someone says it is going to get ugly out there. Someone else says they have seen worse. A third person, zipping a cardigan higher, says she hopes the school's canceled tomorrow because her kids are already restless. There is a texture to these conversations that belongs to places with real winters. Weather is never just weather. It is commute, childcare, groceries, payroll, furnace bills, parking, boots left by the door. And so the office keeps working even as the windows gradually begin offering a different story. At first, the change is subtle. The parking lot loses contrast. The painted stripes between spaces begin to soften under white accumulation. A row of cars along the far edge looks as though someone has dusted them with flour. Then the wind lifts. Trees beyond the lot sway more decisively. Snow no longer drops straight downward. It goes slantwise, sideways. It skates low over the asphalt in pale streamers. By mid-morning, people are standing longer than usual at the windows. The radio in the break room has become harder to ignore. Travel advisories are multiplying. Conditions are changing faster than expected. Snowfall is intensifying in parts of the region. Visibility has dropped on exposed highways. Officials are urging caution. That last word again, caution, another useful word, and another one that means very different things depending on where you are standing. In a heated office, caution can still sound theoretical. In a car later, it will sound physical. Sometime before noon, management decides that people should leave early. It is not a dramatic announcement. No one runs, no alarms sound, but you can feel the mood of the room shift all at once from normal workday irritation to practical urgency. People gather bags, coats come off hooks, someone calls home, someone else hurries to copy a few numbers before the phones become unreliable. Goodbyes become more specific than usual. Drive carefully, call. When you get home, take the main road, not the back way. Bring the radio up loud. The elevator ride down feels slightly too slow. The lobby doors open, and the weather that had been a view becomes an encounter. The wind hits first, then the sting of snow, then the realization that the parking lot you crossed this morning has become a different landscape in the space of a few hours. Cars are furred with snow. The drifts are already beginning to build against tires and doors. What looked from the window like a manageable inconvenience feels in person more muscular, more insistent. The snow does not merely decorate surfaces now. It tries to occupy space. It pushes into footsteps. It begins building shapes of its own. You lower your head and make your way toward your car. One careful step after another, blinking against the fast, dry flakes. By the time you reach it, your gloves are wet and your face has that needled numbness that comes before real pain. The driver's side is half rimmed with drifted snow. You sweep and scrape enough away to tug the door open. The moment you close yourself inside, silence falls like a blanket. Not real silence, of course. Your breath is there, the fabric of the seat. The engine key in your hand, But compared to the assault outside, the inside of the car feels like a sealed thought. You turn the key, the engine hesitates, then catches. That small ignition feels miraculous. Around you, others are trying the same thing. Some cars roar awake. Some cough. One man is pushing at the trunk of another car while the driver presses the accelerator too hard and sprays snow uselessly backward. People who have never exchanged more than nods in a parking lot now lean together against bumpers, because weather has a way of reducing social distance to whatever practical kindness requires. The heater begins its slow labor. The windshield fogs, clears in patches, fogs again. You wait a minute longer than you want to, then begin the drive home. It should take 15 minutes. It does not very quickly. The road begins withdrawing the visual cues you normally depend on without noticing. The lane markings are gone first, then the edge between road and shoulder becomes uncertain. Then intersections flatten into whiteness. Even familiar stretches seem to lose identity under the moving snow. You find yourself driving by a memory, an instinct, as much as by sight. The wipers work furiously, but the glass seems determined to close again. Between each sweep, the view fills at once with white movement. The taillights ahead of you appear and disappear like embers in a windy dark. For long seconds at a time, you have only the idea that the road continues forward because you remember that it should. This is one of the strangest things about a blizzard. It is not loud in the same way a thunderstorm is loud. It does not announce itself with single huge cracks. Its power comes partly from erasure. It removes the signs that allow orientation. A road becomes a pale guess. A distance becomes unknowable. A familiar route becomes a tunnel with no walls, only glowing white. Cars are already collecting at awkward angles near medians and exits. A truck on the shoulder looks almost sculptural, its shape being swallowed from below. A city bus moves slowly, so slowly that for a moment it seems less like transport than like a large, stubborn object refusing to accept what the weather is saying. Inside your own car, time changes character. Every red light feels longer. Every gentle brake becomes a negotiation. You grip the wheels so steadily that later your hands will ache from tension more than from cold. The radio speaks intermittently through static closures, delays, conditions worsening, if travel is not necessary. Stay off the roads, but of course, for everyone already on the roads, that advice has arrived too late to be helpful. There are moments when you think it might be smarter to stop. There are other moments when stopping seems worse, so you continue. One careful mile, another. The heater is finally beginning to matter. Warm air touches your knees, your hands, your face. Outside, the snow thickens in the headlights until the beam itself seems crowded. It is like driving through static, through shredded paper, through an atmosphere made visible and unkind. When at last you turn onto your street, relief comes so quickly it feels like a weakness in the chest. And then even your own block surprises you. The houses are there, but distant, estranged behind the storm. Porch lights shine only as blurred smudges. Mailboxes have shortened or vanished. Cars parked along the curb are becoming rounded white forms without windows or mirrors or intention. The neat order of the neighborhood is being rewritten at astonishing speed into something older and stranger. A white topography where property lines and practical geometry matter very little. You stop where you think your driveway begins. It may or may not be exact. Accuracy has become less important than nearness. The walk from the car to the front door is usually a thoughtless thing. Tonight it is a passage. Snow catches at your boots. Some steps are shallow, some deeper than expected. The wind pushes from the side and seems to test your balance with curious malice. It finds the gap between scarf and collar, works under the cuff, needles your cheeks. You can hear it in the bare branches overhead and in the thin, hard streamers of snow moving over the drifted yard. At the door, your fingers feel clumsy with cold. The lock takes longer than it should. Then the door opens inward, and warm indoor air reaches your face in a wave so gentle it is almost emotional. You step inside and close the storm out. Immediately, the house changes meaning. A house in regular weather is convenience, habit, storage for your life. A house in a blizzard becomes something almost ceremonial. A boundary, a kept fire, a yes against the no of the wind. Snow falls from your coat onto the floor. Your boots leave wet marks. Your fingers burn as they thaw. For a moment you stand in the entryway and simply listen. The heat is still running, the refrigerator is still humming. Somewhere a floorboard settles under the pressure of the cold outdoors and the warmth within. The windows are beginning to speak in small ticks and sighs. You move through the rooms with a new kind of attention. Not fear, exactly, not yet, but attention sharpened by the awareness that the outside world is no longer dependable in its usual way. You gather candles, find matches, check the pantry, fill a few pots with water, bring extra blankets into the living room, set the radio where it can be reached in the dark. These are simple acts, but they feel different now. They are no longer chores. They are a way of placing order around yourself before disorder presses harder at the walls. Outside, the daylight disappears earlier than seems fair. Winter often does that, but this evening the darkness does not come cleanly. Instead, the world dims through layers of storm. White becomes gray, gray becomes a deeper moving whiteness. The horizon is lost. The window is no longer a frame around a neighborhood. It is a screen of weather. When the power goes out, it does so after warning you first. A flicker, a dimming, a recovery, another dimming. Then all at once the house steps backward in time. The hum disappears, the furnace hushes, the lights vanish. The clocks go blank. The modern world, with all its quiet machinery, withdraws so completely that for a few seconds the dark seems larger than the room. You light a candle, then another. Small yellow circles rise in the house. Furniture returns in softened form. The corners remain dark. The walls seem farther away and more intimate at once. Shadows move with every draft, and beneath the little flame sounds. Beneath your own breathing, beneath the rustle of blankets and coat sleeves, the wind continues its long conversation with the outside of the house. A candlelit room changes the scale of thought. It encourages smaller thoughts, useful thoughts. How much water is set aside, whether the windows need another curtain fold, which room holds heat best, how many batteries the radio has left. This narrowing of attention is one of the most ancient human experiences. Outside is too much. Inside must become enough. If there is a fireplace, the fire becomes the center of the evening, and everyone arranges themselves around it the way people have done for longer than recorded history. If there is no fireplace, then the kitchen becomes the useful heart of the house. A gas stove can still warm a pot, warm a room a little. Warm the hands if you lean close enough. In weather like this, architecture reveals its loyalties. The radio comes on in short doses. The announcer's voice sounds thinner in battery mode, yet also more intimate. Travel is nearly impossible in many counties. Emergency crews are overwhelmed. Stay indoors, conserve heat, check on neighbors if it is safe to do so. The governor is preparing further emergency measures. The storm system is intensifying across a broad region. You turn the radio off after a few minutes because batteries now feel like part of the food supply. In the silence that follows, every household sound acquires significance. A spoon in a mug, the fold of a blanket, boots set by the door, the soft tap of sleet or harder snow against one pane and then another. It becomes possible to hear how much of everyday life is usually hidden beneath electrical noise. You heat something simple to eat, soup perhaps, or beans from a can, maybe bread held near warmth until it softens. Steam rises into the cold shadows of the kitchen. You cup the bowl in both hands for a moment before eating, enjoying the way warmth travels through ceramic into skin. There is comfort in hot food far beyond its nutrition. It tells the body a story the mind wants to believe. We are still inside, we are still intact. The world has not taken everything. Before trying to sleep, you move carefully from room to room. Curtains are drawn tighter, doors are closed to keep what warmth remains in fewer spaces. The bedroom is colder than the living room now, the hallway colder than that. The house is quietly reorganizing itself around the loss of power, deciding which places will matter most, until morning. Sleep comes unevenly in weather like this. The wind is too present to ignore. Sometimes it rises to a high, strained note near the roofline. Sometimes it drops into a long, deep, rushing sound that seems to pass not around the house, but through the night itself. You wake often, or perhaps you never fall deeply asleep at all, only move between dozing and listening. Candlelight, if one flame has been left going carefully in the next room, makes a dim, grieving gold against the ceiling. The blankets are heavy, the air is dry and cool. Time has stopped behaving like time. Morning comes slowly, not with sunlight spilling in, but with a pale thickening behind the curtains. When you look out, the world is gone, and another one has been laid on top of it. The car is a white hill. The sidewalk is nowhere. The mailbox has vanished. The fence that marked the yard has ceased to exist in any visible form. Snow is pressed high against the lower part of the door. The window edges are feathered with frost from inside. A drift has risen against the porch rail so smoothly it looks almost intentional, as if the storm spent the night designing new architecture. You open the door and the cold steps inward at once. Snow leans against the threshold in a compacted wall. You shovel because that is what the body wants to do when faced with immovable conditions. It wants action, even symbolic action. It wants to answer largeness with effort. The first few lifts feel satisfying. The shovel bites, rises, empties. Then you discover what wind has done to the drift. The upper layer is powdery, but beneath it the snow is dense, packed, resistant, almost cohesive. Each lift grows heavier. Each throw goes only a short distance because there is nowhere to place one wall of snow except beside another. The work is real. The progress is not. 10 minutes in, your shoulders are burning. 20 minutes in, you are sweating under layers of air cold enough to sting the lungs. 30 minutes in, you realize the storm is replacing your labor almost as fast as you perform it. That realization is not theatrical. It is quiet. It is the moment when you stop imagining that effort will conquer the weather and begin understanding that endurance is something else entirely. So you go back inside. Wet gloves are laid out. Another dry sweater replaces the damp one. The radio comes on for 3 careful minutes. Roads remain closed. Travel impossible in many places. National Guard mobilizations are being discussed. Power outages are widespread. More snow, more wind. Stay where you are. And so a new kind of life begins, one that runs not on appointments or clocks or commutes, but on heat, food, brief radio updates, and the management of energy. The world has narrowed, but it has also grown clearer. What matters now can be named in a short list: warmth, water, food, light, a working radio, a path to the door, however small. Blankets, patience. By the second day, the house contains different climates. The kitchen, when the stove has just been used, offers a pocket of relative mercy. The living room, crowded with blankets and perhaps a candle or lantern, feels habitable. The hallway becomes a cold river between useful spaces. The bedroom is less a room now than a storage place for heavier sleep. You move differently through the house, more slowly, more deliberately, conserving warmth and effort without even deciding to. The body adapts in its own old-fashioned way. You wear more layers until you feel padded and shapeless. You tuck your hands under your arms whenever you stop moving. You sit near warmth longer and farther from the windows. You drink not because you are thirsty, but because a hot cup gives the hands purpose. You become aware of your own breathing in the cold air near the far end of the room. A little cloud, a small proof that the house is losing the argument degree by degree. Yet, there are still comforts. The extraordinary thing about hardship is that it sharpens small pleasures instead of erasing them. Instant coffee mixed with water warmed on the stove tastes far better than it deserves to. Soup from a can acquires dignity. A fresh pair of socks feels almost luxurious. A blanket taken from near the fire or heater seems to carry memory inside the fabric. You begin measuring the day with soft, practical rituals. Listen to the radio, eat, check the windows, warm the hands, rest, wake, shovel a little, retreat, read by weak natural light while it lasts. Sit quietly when it fades, without television, without easy travel, without the scattered demands of ordinary schedules. The mind grows strange in ways that are not always unpleasant. It wanders, it remembers, it notices the frost pattern at the corner of the window, the exact tone of the wind when it catches the north side of the house instead of the house, the west, the sound a candle makes when the room is still enough, the way silence deepens when no cars pass, no planes cross overhead, no voices rise from the street, because the street itself has been covered into silence. This kind of quiet is rare in modern life. It is almost pre-modern, in that silence thoughts lengthen. You remember childhood winters that felt magical instead of threatening. School closings, mittens, drying on radiators, boots by the back door, snowmen built under skies that were never in danger of trapping anyone for days. Then you compare those memories to this storm and understand the difference between snow as decoration and snow as force. Even so, the mind cannot sustain alarm forever. It settles into repetition. That repetition becomes a kind of trance. You nap in the afternoon, wrapped in blankets in the one room that still feels inhabited by warmth. Wake with a dry mouth and no idea how long you slept. Turn on the radio and discover it is only 40 minutes later, or perhaps 3 hours. Time is not a straight line in a storm. It folds all across the blizzard zone. Other people are learning the same altered clock. Families in suburban homes, elderly residents in older houses where every draft matters, tenants in upstairs apartments, farm families staring out at fields erased into one level white body, truck drivers stranded at motels, nurses sleeping in corners of hospitals because roads cannot carry them home. Every life is reduced, for a little while, to waiting and keeping warm. And yet, the waiting is not identical from one house to another. A storm is shared. Exposure is not, in sturdier homes, with better insulation, fuller pantries, and perhaps a fireplace that was once mostly decorative. The blizzard is serious, but buffered. In poorer neighborhoods, in older structures, in places where a missed day of work already has consequences and a weak furnace is not theoretical. The cold moves closer to danger faster. The same snow lies over every roof, but not every roof shelters equally. This truth unfolds quietly during disasters and loudly afterward. People remember the storm as a regional event, but inside it, hardship always has an address. Still, there's another truth too, one gentler and more human. When systems fail, neighbors become visible. A man who never usually speaks beyond a wave now knocks through the drift just to check that the woman next door has enough canned food. Teenagers in one house carry a shovel to another porch because that family has small children and no one strong enough to clear the doorway. Someone shares kerosene. Someone shares bread. Someone passes along the latest radio report from a battery set that still has life. These are not dramatic heroics, not the kind that make monuments. They are smaller, softer acts, but many winters are survived through exactly such acts, repeated over and over until the weather relents. While ordinary people are living inside the storm this way, there are also rooms full of maps and telephones, where the blizzard is being watched from another angle. In Cleveland, meteorologist John Hamilton has been in the weather office so long that his body has nearly forgotten what real darkness and real daylight feel like outside the station. He is not a flamboyant forecaster, no booming television voice, no dramatic gestures at a wall-sized map. He belongs instead to that quieter breed of a professional whose authority comes from concentration. Careful hair, wire-rimmed glasses, coffee gone cold at his elbow, charts covered in pencil marks, a short-sleeved office shirt under a cardigan because the building heat itself is beginning to struggle. For years he has read the atmosphere through numbers. Pressure trends, temperatures, wind gradients, moisture fields. A sky broken into measurements. Some people read faces. Hamilton reads weather. He trusts patterns more than personality because patterns, unlike people, do not pretend to be other than they are. Before the storm reached full strength, he had already felt the old professional unease that comes when data turns from interesting to ominous. Arctic air was pushing south harder than seemed comfortable. Moisture was feeding north. The low-pressure system was deepening. And the timing of those pieces, the way they were converging over the Great Lakes region, suggested not just another winter storm, but one of those atmospheric arrangements that later acquired capital letters in memory. He rechecked the numbers, then rechecked them again. Pressure still falling, wind still increasing in forecast models, snow totals rising. Travel hazards becoming white-out probabilities. He wrote the warnings in the careful, practical language his profession required. Not poetry, not panic, simply the clearest way available to say that a very dangerous storm was coming, and that people needed to respect it. Warnings moved outward through offices and broadcasters and public systems. Some were heard, some were noted, and half dismissed. That is one of the quiet tragedies of forecasting. A warning can be accurate and still fail to become action in time. People tend to judge present danger by past inconvenience. If the last 5 winter warnings caused only trouble, why assume this one will be different? Now, while the storm rages, Hamilton and his colleagues listen to reports that turn atmosphere into human consequence. Interstates closed, visibility near zero, vehicles stranded, plows overwhelmed, hospitals requesting guidance they already know cannot solve the road problem. Emergency coordinators asking about windows of improvement that have not yet opened. The weather office itself becomes a kind of bunker. Teletypes chatter, phones ring, men and women in government clothing hunch over maps under artificial light. The air smells of paper, cold coffee, damp wool, and long concentration. Sleep is snatched in chairs or not at all. The whole room seems built on the understanding that to keep watching matters, even if watching cannot itself reduce the snow by a single inch. Hamilton knows something the public only half knows. Forecasting is powerful, but not sovereign. To see is not to stop. To warn is not to rescue. The atmosphere answers to physics, not to urgency. This makes his work feel both essential and insufficient. He speaks to local stations, updates officials, refines snowfall expectations, tracks pressure, measures the wind, listens for what the storm will do next. And while doing all this, he also absorbs, in the abstract and through fragments, the private suffering now spread across the region. The numbers on the chart are no longer only numbers. They are roads. No ambulance can travel. A power line down near a neighborhood where furnaces matter. A car stalled in the wrong place. An older resident too proud or too frightened to ask for help. A mother trying to keep children warm in the living room. A nurse unable to leave the hospital. A man with a shovel realizing that the drift is higher than his chest. The emotional burden of weather work is seldom spoken of in romantic terms. It is not cinematic enough, yet there is a real sadness in understanding the danger clearly while remaining unable to prevent its full arrival. Hamilton is not the storm's master. He is its interpreter. He translates the sky into sentences people may or may not obey. Around the office, the staff continue in a rhythm that becomes almost monastic. Read, mark, call, listen, update, wait. The outside world exists for them now, mostly as incoming reports and the occasional look through a window too blurred with blowing snow to reveal much beyond whiteness. Their room is full of data, but little of comfort, and yet, like all the households in the blizzard, they too build a kind of temporary life around the essentials. Coffee, paper, lamps, coats on backs, shared fatigue, usefulness, farther south and west, in government buildings and county offices. Other forms of usefulness are trying to organize themselves. Governors look out over whitened capitals through well-sealed glass. Emergency coordinators move colored markers across maps. State police communicate closures. National Guard personnel prepare routes that may not yet exist in passable form. Telephone operators field call after call from people who need information, reassurance, fuel, access, medicine, rescue, or simply confirmation that the broader world has not forgotten them. One of the revelations of a blizzard is how much modern authority depends on movement. A truck delayed is a warehouse cut off from meat. An ambulance stalled is not a symbolic failure, but a literal one. A state can declare urgency on paper more quickly than it can move 1 gallon of fuel down a buried road. All the invisible structure of everyday life becomes visible in interruption. Electricity matters because its absence remakes the house. Plows matter because without them a city becomes a landscape again. Grocery supply chains matter because shelves do not refill themselves by civic virtue. Phone lines matter because loneliness grows sharper in uncertainty. A storm does not create human dependency, it reveals it. The television stations, where they still have power, turn the blizzard into public image. Anchors speak seriously beneath studio lighting while footage shows abandoned cars, white highways, men battling drifts, neighborhoods looking half erased. These images are useful, but incomplete. Cameras catch spectacle more easily than repetition. They show the snowbank and the stranded truck. They do not fully show the hours in between. The long candlelit boredom, the quiet anxiety about pipes freezing, the slow ache in shoulders after pointless shoveling, the way children become sleepy and restless in the same afternoon. History later remembers both kinds of truth, the famous photographs and the private rooms they could not enter, back in the houses, the storm keeps rearranging thought. By the third day, people stop imagining a quick return to normal and begin organizing themselves around patience. The mind becomes less dramatic and more repetitive. This is not defeat, it is adaptation. You notice how little a person truly needs in a hard winter if the basics are still within reach. Enough heat to keep the house from turning hostile. Enough water to stay ahead of thirst. Enough food to quiet hunger. Enough light to preserve shape in the evening. Enough voice from the radio to know the world beyond the drift still exists. Many people sleep more than usual during such weather, not because they are at ease, but because the body instinctively withdraws toward conservation. Wrapped in blankets, near a stove or fire or the residual warmth of a shared room, they drift in and out of a sleep that feels older than ordinary sleep. The blizzard reduces the world to shelter and weather, and inside that reduction the body remembers old instructions. Be still, keep warm, wait for light. The dreams of these days are often vivid, white corridors, buried doors, endless streets, summer lawns remembered with absurd affection. Some wake disoriented, unsure whether it is dawn or afternoon, because the same gray-white light has been filling the windows for hours. Others write in notebooks by candle glow, not because there is anything practical to record, but because writing proves the self is still moving through time, even when the world outside appears motionless. One woman in Ohio would later remember the sound of the radio voice as clearly as if it were still in the room. Another man in Indiana would remember the taste of tomato soup heated 3 times because the family kept stretching supplies. Children would remember making games from blankets and chairbacks while the adults spoke quietly in the kitchen. Elderly people would remember the particular relief of hearing a shovel on the porch and knowing someone had come to check on them. The official history of a storm is made of measurements. The lived history of a storm is made of these details. Somewhere, during those long days, the blizzard stops being only an event and becomes a condition of mind. The world of errands and obligations and appointments feels far away, almost fictional. In its place, there is only this smaller world of windows. Hands, food, breath, and weather. It is not comfortable exactly, but it is clarifying. Many people, years later, would struggle to explain why they remembered the blizzard with a strange mixture of dread and tenderness. That mixture comes from the fact that difficulty often makes life look simpler than ease does. You know what matters because almost everything else has been removed. That clarity can be frightening. It can also be soothing. Eventually, of course, no storm can hold the same intensity forever. The atmosphere spends itself. Pressure shifts. Wind weakens by degrees. Snowfall, once furious, begins to loosen into intervals and flurries. In the weather office, Hamilton sees the first signs before most people in their houses can feel them. The data edges toward relief. The trend lines soften. It is not over yet, but the storm's grip is no longer tightening. It is merely holding for people indoors. The change arrives more slowly, less scientifically. The wind sounds different first, not gentle, not yet, but less continuous. There are pauses now, small pockets of stillness. Then the light at the window changes almost imperceptibly. The sky begins to separate itself from the ground again. Distances return by inches, and then there comes a morning when the sun appears. Not warm sunlight, winter sunlight, cold, brilliant, almost impossible to look at reflected off the deep snow. After days of white confusion, the sight of a blue sky above a buried neighborhood feels nearly unreal. People step outside blinking, shoulders wrapped in coats, and stand in the brightness as if emerging from under something heavier than weather. The drifts are still enormous. Cars remain entombed. Streets are narrow troughs cut by labor and machines. But the atmosphere has changed temperament. The violence has gone out of it. Neighbors need one another in that brightness with a strange intimacy. No one needs to explain very much. Their faces already tell the story. Sleep lost, power gone or nearly gone, meals stretched, children managed, paths carved, worry endured. Now they stand beneath a vast blue stillness, and the shared fact of survival seems to pass between them with a nod. This after-blizzard light becomes one of the lasting images of 1978. Streets transformed into white corridors, plows laboring like ships through frozen seas, people on porches with shovels resting in their hands. The first reopened stores crowded not with panic, but with practical relief. Gas stations, grocery aisles, pharmacies, the ordinary infrastructure of life, reappearing as if uncovered rather than invented. It is in this period, after the storm has broken but before life is fully normal, that memory begins its work. People start telling the story even while they are still inside it. How high the drift was at the door, how long the power stayed out. What the radio kept saying, how the windows shook, how the children slept in the living room, how the coffee tasted when made on the stove, how the wind sounded at 3 in the morning. Stories are one of the first tools humans use to thaw experience into meaning. And snow itself seems made from memory. It records, it covers, it preserves for a while, then releases. In the days after the blizzard, the region becomes a museum of temporary forms. Abandoned vehicles half visible beneath drifts, fences emerging in sections, roofs shouldering improbable loads, tree branches bent into new positions. Every block carries the visible signature of what has passed over it. Long after the snow melts, some version of that signature remains in people. Winter storms often outlast themselves by becoming part of local language. This is nothing, someone says during a later snowfall. You should have seen 78. The phrase does not merely compare depths. It compares states of mind. The blizzard enters family memory, workplace memory, regional memory. It becomes a benchmark for preparedness and a shared legend of inconvenience, danger, endurance, and astonishment. But snow also invites larger thoughts if one listens long enough. For thousands of years, human beings have made meanings out of winter. In northern stories, winter often stands for waiting, for trial, for scarcity, for the time when visible life seems to retreat underground and into walls. Yet winter also teaches trust in hidden continuance. Beneath snow there is still earth. Beneath the hard season, there is still a calendar moving. Trees that look lifeless are not dead. They are keeping a quieter form of time. There is a comfort in that old lesson, and the blizzard of 1978, for all its severity, did not erase it. Imagine the snow from that storm lifted into the deeper history of cold places. Some of it melted into gutters and rivers within days. Some fed streams and reservoirs months later. Some drifted against tree lines and lingered. Some may have traveled again through air and cloud and frost far from where it first fell. Weather does not end where human stories end. It re-enters larger cycles. Scientists who drill into old ice in Greenland or Antarctica read annual layers like an archive. Dust, ash, chemistry, air trapped from other eras in that grand, slow memory of the planet. Even powerful storms are reduced to delicate traces. A blizzard that dominates 3 days of human consciousness becomes one pale event in a much larger ledger of winters. That thought can feel humbling. It can also feel kind. What seems endless in one cold night is not endless to the earth. And what feels overwhelming in one human life may, with time, settle into a line in a story, a photograph, a family phrase, a regional caution, a quiet admiration for the people who kept going. There is another image worth holding here. Every snowflake in that great blizzard formed through tiny differences in air. Temperature, moisture, and chance. Each crystal was shaped by its passage. Then it landed and lost its individuality inside the drift. Billions of separate patterns became one white mass that trapped cars, sealed doors, and transformed highways into silence. There is something almost philosophical in that. Weather is made of particulars so small. No one could count them, yet together they become force. Human communities can work the same way. One neighbor checking on another, one shovel lent, one hot meal passed across a threshold, one radio report shared, tiny acts becoming survival at the scale of a street or apartment building. The blizzard revealed fragility. It also revealed accumulation in a gentler sense. The world is held together not only by large systems, but by small repeated acts of usefulness. In the days after, Hamilton and the weather staff compile numbers that will later define the storm in records. Wind speeds, snowfall totals, death counts, closures, pressure data, these numbers matter. They shape official memory. Yet even Hamilton, who trusts data deeply, would understand that numbers are only one language of weather. The other language is lived sensation, a window frosting from the inside, a front door that will not open cleanly, a mug warming cold fingers, the silence after the power fails, a child asking whether school is canceled even though all roads have disappeared. The first sunlight after 3 days of moving white. When he finally steps outside into the blue brightness after the storm, he sees not only that the forecast was right, but that correctness never captures total experience. The streets are canyons, the city is bright to the point of pain, the air has that crystal hardness that follows great cold. His own car is buried somewhere under a shape that used to be practical and is now geological. Around him, other people are emerging, bundled and stunned. Wearing that expression humans have after enduring something large together. He has done his work, watched, warned, measured, stayed. That is often all good work can promise, not mastery presence. Years later, others with better models and better computers would look back at the blizzard of 1978 as a landmark in forecasting and emergency planning. They would study what was seen in time, what was not, how travel bans were used, how infrastructure bent, how communities responded. But those later analyses, useful as they are, cannot improve on the emotional fact already known to the people who lived through it. A storm can make the ordinary world feel miraculous when it returns. The electric light you stop noticing every night, the road you assume will always be there. The grocery shelf, the warm bed, the easy act of turning on a tap, the unremarkable privilege of believing that tomorrow will resemble today. All of that looked different after the blizzard. Perhaps that is one reason such events stay in memory so long. Not only because they were frightening, but because they briefly stripped the world down until comfort became visible again. They reminded people that civilization is made of many small dependabilities layered on top of weather and terrain. Remove enough of those dependabilities at once, and the body understands gratitude faster than the mind does. There were other rooms too, all across the buried states, each one holding its own version of the storm. A farmhouse kitchen where boots were lined in a row beside the stove in the back door could only open halfway because the drift had become a white wall by midnight. A narrow upstairs apartment where the radiator clicked uncertainly, and the tenant slept in a coat beneath 3 blankets because the windows were old and the cold crept in around the frames no matter how many towels had been pushed into the cracks. A suburban den where children built a temporary camp out of sofa cushions and quilts, turning inconvenience into adventure because childhood often knows how to borrow wonder even from weather that frightens adults. A hospital corridor where nurses stayed on shift because no road could reliably take them home, and where sleep came in brief folds of exhaustion between call bells. Paper charts, and the constant practical tenderness that illness requires in every season. A police station with wet floors near the entrance and coffee going stale in too many paper cups. Men and women listening to radio updates, making lists, erasing plans, withdrawing routes, understanding hour by hour how little force there is in authority when snow has redrawn the map. A truck stop near an interstate that had ceased to function like an interstate, where stranded drivers sat beneath weak lights eating pie that had gone cold. Calling home when phone lines allowed it, listening to strangers tell the same weather stories in different accents, bound together by the simple fact that none of them could go farther tonight. A railroad yard where steel, snow, and silence met under floodlights, and where even large machines seemed subdued by the scale of the storm. A downtown office tower, mostly dark, with only a few lit windows where maintenance crews kept watch over pipes. Elevators, boilers, and the great hidden organs of a building that city workers hardly noticed until winter turned each one into a concern. The blizzard was one event on a map, but in lived experience, it was 1,000 private interiors, each with its own smell, its own sound, its own level of worry, its own inventory of blankets and canned food and patience. That is another reason such storms stay in memory. They do not pass through life as a single headline. They pass through kitchens, stairwells, loading docks, classrooms, waiting rooms, enclosed porches, and bedrooms with frost at the corners of the glass. They touch the body at close range, and the body remembers differently than the newspaper does. During the long middle of the blizzard, when novelty had worn off and resolution had not yet arrived, many people discovered that hardship becomes most difficult not in the first dramatic hours, but in the repetition that follows. The first evening is action. Gather candles, fill containers, Check the radio. Secure the windows. The second day's adjustment. Ration the food. Save the batteries. Keep moving enough to stay warm. But the later hours, when the weather is still there, and you are still there, and little can be done to hurry either fact along. Those hours require a gentler form of endurance. This slower endurance often looks unimpressive from the outside. It is one more pot of soup warmed on a stove, one more attempt to brush packed snow away from the back step, one more careful listen at the radio, one more nap taken early because darkness and cold make the body heavy, one more conversation held in low voices because loudness feels wasteful when the room itself has become a vessel for warmth. There is a kind of dignity in that quiet repetition. History books usually prefer motion, turning points, declarations, rescues, and totals. But much of survival is repetitive rather than dramatic. It is built out of ordinary acts done again and again until the dangerous period loosens. In this way, the blizzard revealed something that calmer weather allows people to forget. Human life is sustained not only by grand systems, but by maintenance. By tending, by repeating the useful thing one more time, you can imagine the second night settling in over the buried neighborhoods. The windows dark before the body is ready for them to darken. The rooms contract again around the available heat. Wet mittens, scarves, and gloves hang where they can dry, or at least become less damp. Someone opens a cupboard and studies the remaining cans, not with panic, but with a kind of arithmetic patience. Someone else taps a flashlight against the palm, willing the batteries to last. A kettle whispers. A candle lowers by another inch. Outside, the wind is still speaking, though perhaps less violently than before, and every change in its voice is studied for meaning. When people are cut off from easy information, they become interpreters of tiny signs. The quality of the light at the window, the angle of the glowing snow past the porch, the distance to which a neighboring roofline can be seen, the number of birds, if any, landing near the house, the engine noise, if an engine noise happens at all, somewhere far beyond the drift. Meaning gathers in very small things. This is one of the hidden gifts inside severe weather, though it never feels like a gift while the storm is active. Attention becomes purified. The mind can no longer scatter itself into endless unnecessary channels. It returns to the immediate world, light, warmth, sound, hunger, rest, another human voice, the shape of one room. The shape of one day, the body, stripped of distraction, becomes ancient for a while. Even children, who often experience storms differently from adults, learn a version of this narrowed attention. They notice the grown-ups speaking more quietly than usual. They notice that meals are simpler. They notice that everyone stays in one room longer. They notice that the familiar background noises of appliances and television have gone missing. Some find it cozy, some find it unsettling. Most remember it for decades, not as a list of data points, but as a feeling that the whole house had leaned inward and was listening. Across the Midwest, factories that normally ran on schedule felt silent or slowed. Warehouses, distribution centers, bus depots, school districts, and municipal garages all felt the storm in their own ways. The absence of movement rippled outward into payrolls, deliveries, attendance, and the invisible timing that makes cities appear seamless on ordinary days. A blizzard, among other things, teaches how much of modern life depends on roads remaining unsurprising. The minute roads become uncertain, whole chains of assumption begin to tremble. Yet once again, that truth was not felt evenly. Some people lost only convenience. Others lost wages. Some spent the storm in spacious homes with stored food and multiple forms of heat. Others spent it counting fuel, sharing rooms, hoping the pipes would hold. In later years, historians and journalists would look back on storms like this and note the inequalities they exposed, but the people living through them did not need analysis to know the difference. They knew it in the walls, in the pantry, in the thickness of the windows, in the distance to the nearest help. Still, if weather reveals inequality, it also reveals character. There are always people who make themselves useful with astonishing calm. The man with the better shovel who clears 2 porches instead of 1. The woman who boils extra water and carries it in a thermos to an older neighbor. The teenager who volunteers to walk a dangerous short distance because his legs are strong and someone else's are not. the maintenance worker who sleeps at the school because the boiler cannot be left unattended, the radio announcer who keeps his voice level and warm for listeners he will never meet, the plow driver making one more pass at 3 in the morning, even though the wind may fill the route again before dawn. These people seldom become the main characters of official memory, yet every disaster depends upon them. History at the level of headlines names governors, declarations, totals, and dates. History at the level of human continuance depends on the person who remembered to check the basement, refill the lantern, bring the dog inside, share the batteries, keep speaking calmly, and show up for one more difficult hour. The blizzard also changed the geography of sound. In ordinary winter cities, there is always some low human murmur beneath the weather. Cars in the distance, a siren somewhere, a plane overhead, doors closing, a dog barking from behind a fence during the worst of the storm. Much of that vanished. Sound was either near, such as the stove or a spoon against a mug, or else it was the wind. Whole towns seemed to exist inside one giant breathing weather system. That sonic emptiness left deep marks in memory. Many survivors would later say not only that the storm was big, but that it was strangely quiet in all the places where life should have been noisy. And then, there were the mornings after the worst of it, when people woke in layered clothing and looked toward windows with the same cautious hope. Had the wind softened? Was the sky separating from the ground again? Could the outline of the church steeple, the water tower, the grain elevator, the apartment block at the corner now be seen where yesterday there had been only moving white? Hope during long storms often returns not as emotion first, but as visibility. A little farther down the street, a little more shape in the world, a little less force in the air, that is enough for the spirit to begin rising before the body fully believes it. In the weather office, Hamilton felt a related kind of relief, though his arrived through instruments rather than through windows. The trends were changing. The pressure charts no longer suggested continued deepening. The winds, while still strong, were losing that locked, punishing intensity. Snow bands were becoming less organized, even before the public could feel that the storm had begun to tire. The room of forecasters could see the long arc bending away from crisis. Yet relief for them was also tempered by the knowledge that aftermath has its own dangers. People go outside too soon, try to drive too early, overexert themselves with shovels, discover burst pipes, damaged roofs, emptied fuel tanks, and all the practical injuries left behind once the sky has already moved on. A disaster does not end neatly at the moment the weather calms. It lingers in labor, in repair, in cost, in memory. This labor of aftermath is easy to underestimate because it lacks the visual drama of the storm itself. But to dig out a city, a town, a county, a farm network, a rail line, a school district, a hospital road, and 1,000 private driveways is its own slow chapter of history. Snow must be moved, cars must be found, roofs checked, deliveries resumed, school calendars rewritten, work shifts rearranged, family routines restaged. The pace is not cinematic, it is steady, practical, almost humble. And perhaps because it is humble, it harmonizes well with sleep. There is something soothing in imagining the world being patiently restored. One street reopened, one porch cleared, one staircase uncovered, one grocery truck arriving, one furnace repaired, one path from house to house re-established where the drift had made every home into its own island. Years later, those who were children during the blizzard would remember the wonder of scale as much as the hardship. Snow higher than a car hood, tunnels carved through drifts, adults suddenly reduced to tiny figures, moving through a white world that seemed built for giants. For them, memory often mixed fear with enchantment. For adults, memory leaned more heavily toward logistics and concern. Yet the same storm held both experiences at once, because all history is lived differently depending on the body, the age, and the responsibility inside it. That may be why stories of 1978 endured so well. They could be told in many registers: a civic story about preparedness and response, a family story about soup, blankets, and a powerless house, a child's story about impossible snowbanks and the first day outside after the sky cleared, a worker's story about roads that vanished and a shift that could not end. A meteorologist's story about reading the atmosphere correctly and still feeling helpless before its consequences. A neighbor's story about borrowing salt, batteries, or courage from the house next door. All of these stories belong to the same storm, and together they made it larger than a weather event. They made it a shared winter memory, one that outlived the melt and settled into regional identity. And now, as we move toward the gentlest edge of this winter history, let the blizzard drift farther away again. The emergency bulletins can soften into distance. The plows can continue their work somewhere beyond hearing. The weather office can go dim. The maps can be folded. The porches can be cleared, one careful square at a time. Imagine instead the aftermath at its calmest, a neighborhood under high clean snow and pale afternoon light. Smoke rising slowly from a chimney that has begun working again. A path cut from front door to street. Boots lined up on an old rug to melt. A coat hung near warmth. A kettle beginning to whisper. Children, finally allowed outside, moving clumsily in too many layers, and laughing because the same snow that imprisoned adults has become, in gentler weather, something they can climb. Inside, the house is not yet fully back to normal, but it is once again a place where ordinary life can return. Curtains reopen. Tables are cleared. The pantry is checked not with worry now, but with practical planning. Someone writes down what will need replacing at the store. Someone else sits for a moment longer than necessary, simply enjoying steady heat. These small scenes are history too, not only the peak of danger, but the tenderness of recovery. And because this is a bedtime history, not a marching history, we will end not on statistics or declarations or final summaries, but on the quieter truth the storm leaves behind. You do not need a blizzard to remember the value of warmth. You do not need to be trapped by snow to deserve rest. You do not need to finish every thought from the day before you allow sleep to arrive. The people in that winter of 1978 endured by narrowing life to what mattered most. Tonight you may borrow only the gentle part of that lesson. You may let the unnecessary things fall away for a while. You may keep only the essentials, a room, a blanket, breath moving in and out, the soft awareness that you are inside and safe. The blizzard is not here. It belongs to another time, another roof, another frozen week on a distant calendar. What is here, where you are, is simpler, the weight of the blanket, the softness of the pillow, the dark settling kindly around the furniture, the little shifts in size of a home at night. Maybe the memory of cold makes warmth easier to feel. Maybe that is one reason quiet winter histories are so soothing. They let us stand at a safe distance from severity and then return, with fuller appreciation, to comfort. So let your mind become like a snowfield after the wind has dropped, smooth, untroubled, wide enough that no single thought has to dominate it. If one concern rises, let it be covered lightly. If another arrives, let it settle too. There is no need to chase them tonight. Morning will know what to do with them. Morning always does. For now, there is only the long, slow rhythm of rest, like weather easing after 3 hard days. Imagine once more the houses of 1978 growing quiet after the storm. Candles extinguished because the power has finally returned. Radios turned low, wet gloves drying by a vent or stove, snow still deep outside, but no longer moving with anger. A road reopened at the edge of town, a plow passing at last, a neighbor waving from a path cut through the drift. The deep human relief of knowing that the hardest part has already happened and is now behind you. Carry only that relief forward. Leave the rest in history. Leave the cold in history. Leave the white roads and stalled cars and radio bulletins in history. What comes with you is lighter, a candle glow, a cup held in both hands, a room that keeps warm, a sky that clears, a morning that returns without asking anything of you. And if somewhere at the edge of your thoughts you can still hear the wind, let it be far away now, crossing some other decade, some other roofline, some other sleeping town buried in memory and snow. Closer to you there is only quiet, only breath, only the slow kind descent into sleep. The blizzard has passed. The streets have found their shape again. The radios have gone silent. The candles have shortened to wax in memory. The snow is resting under moonlight where it cannot reach you. And you, tonight, may rest too. No urgency, no schedule. No need to stand watch. Only the soft dark, only warmth. only the gentle closing of the distance between waking and dream. Let history recede, let winter recede, let the world grow quiet enough that even thought begins to soften, and then softer still, until the old storm is nothing more than a pale drift at the edge of the mind, until the house in the story becomes every safe house, until the room around you is the only room that matters, until sleep, patient as snowfall, gathers and gathers and gathers, and at last covers everything in peace.